The holographic display flickered to life in the dimly lit briefing room aboard the U.S. Meridian, casting an eerie blue glow across Captain Janice Reeves' weathered features. The three-dimensional image of Pluto rotated slowly, its mottled surface scarred with unnatural geometric patterns that hadn't existed in any astronomy textbook she'd studied at the Academy 20 years ago. "Reconnaissance drones confirm it," Admiral Chen said, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of the ship's life support systems. "The Orcs have established a fully operational military installation on Pluto's Sputnik Planitia. Intelligence estimates place their forces at approximately 15,000 combat-ready troops, with heavy artillery, atmospheric processors, and what appears to be a long-range quantum bombardment array." Janice studied the hologram with the calculating gaze of a veteran who had seen too many battles. The Orc fortification sprawled across the dwarf planet's largest plain like a metallic cancer, its angular towers and weapon emplacements forming a defensive perimeter that would make a frontal assault suicidal. But that wasn't what worried her most. "Sir, those quantum arrays," she said, pointing to the massive dish-like structures visible in the satellite imagery. "Our projections show they could reach Earth's orbit within 6 hours of activation. Why haven't they fired already?" Admiral Chen's expression darkened. "Because they're not ready yet. Our xenobiologists believe the Orcs are waiting for their full fleet to arrive from the Proxima Centauri system. When they do—" He paused, letting the implication sink in. "Earth's orbital defenses wouldn't last an hour against a coordinated assault." The other officers in the room shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew the statistics. Humanity's expansion into the outer solar system had been rapid but spread thin. Most of their military assets were tied up in the ongoing conflict with the hegemony near Jupiter's moons. A full-scale Orc invasion would catch Earth's defenses woefully unprepared. "Which brings us to why you're here, Captain," the Admiral continued. "Operation Coldfire is a precision strike mission. Your team will infiltrate the Pluto installation, locate and destroy their command center, and eliminate their ability to coordinate with the incoming fleet. Without central command, their ground forces will be vulnerable to our follow-up assault." Janice nodded slowly. She'd led special operations before, but never anything quite this ambitious. "What's my team complement?" 12 of the best. Sergeant Martinez from the Ganymede campaign, Lieutenant Zhang, our top explosives expert, Corporal Reginald for electronic warfare, and 9 other specialists handpicked from various engagements. You'll be deploying in a modified Wraith-class stealth frigate, the Shadow's Edge. The hologram shifted, showing technical specifications of their vessel. The Shadow's Edge was a beautiful piece of engineering, sleek, fast, and nearly invisible to most sensor arrays. But Janice knew that, nearly invisible, might not be good enough against Orc detection systems. "What about extraction?" she asked. Admiral Chen's hesitation was answer enough. "The mission parameters prioritize success over extraction. If you can eliminate the command center, our follow-up fleet will have a fighting chance." "But Captain," he met her eyes directly, "I won't lie to you. This is likely a one-way mission." The room fell silent except for the steady thrum of the ship's engines. Janice had known this moment would come eventually. Every soldier did. The mission where the cause became more important than coming home. She thought briefly of her daughter Sarah, now 16 and attending the Mars Colonial Academy. At least she would be safe, far from Earth when the Orcs inevitably made their move. "When do we deploy?" Janice asked. 1800 hours. That gives you 6 hours to brief your team and make final preparations. The Shadow's Edge is already loaded with everything you'll need: adaptive environmental suits, plasma charges sufficient to level a city block, and enough ammunition to fight your way through hell. As the other officers filed out, Admiral Chen placed a hand on Janice's shoulder. "Captain, I know what I'm asking of you and your team. If there were any other way—" "There isn't," Janice replied simply. "And even if there were, we'd still go. That's what we do." The hangar bay of the Meridian buzzed with pre-mission activity as Janice made her way toward the Shadow's Edge. The stealth frigate sat in its docking cradle like a predator at rest, its hull a matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Maintenance crews swarmed over the vessel, making final adjustments to its cloaking systems, and checking the integrity of its armor plating. "Ma'am!" Sergeant Martinez snapped to attention as she approached. Miguel Martinez was a compact man with dark eyes that had seen too much combat on the frozen battlefields of Ganymede. His left arm bore the distinctive scars of Orc plasma weaponry, a reminder of humanity's first encounter with their new enemy 3 years ago. "At ease, Sergeant. How's the team looking?" "Eager to get some payback, ma'am. Especially Kowalski and Thompson. They lost squad mates in the Ceres incident." Janice nodded. The Ceres mining station had been humanity's first taste of Orc brutality. 17,000 civilians dead, their bodies left to freeze in the asteroid's artificial atmosphere as a warning to other human settlements. The images had been broadcast across the solar system before Earth Command could impose a media blackout. "Gather everyone for final briefing in 10 minutes, she ordered. "And Martinez? Make sure they understand this isn't about revenge. It's about survival." The team assembled in the frigate's cramped briefing compartment, 12 of humanity's finest warriors crammed into a space designed for 6. Janice recognized most of them by reputation if not personal experience. Lieutenant Zhang, the young demolitions expert who had single-handedly destroyed a hegemony dreadnought with nothing but mining charges and incredible timing. Corporal Reginald, whose electronic warfare skills had turned the tide at the Battle of Europa. Private First Class Kowalski, barely 20 but already a veteran of 4 major engagements. "Ladies and gentlemen," Janice began, "we're going to make history today. Unfortunately, it's the kind of history that might never be written down because there won't be anyone left to write it if we fail." A few grim chuckles rippled through the group. "Our target is the Orc Command Center on Pluto. Intelligence suggests it's located in the northern section of their complex, approximately 2 kilometers from their primary landing pad. The structure itself is heavily fortified. We're talking meter-thick armor plating and energy shields that could stop a cruiser's main guns." The holographic display showed the command center in detail, a massive pyramidal structure surrounded by defensive towers and patrol routes. "But every fortress has a weakness," Janice continued. "The Orcs' weakness is their biology. They're cold-weather specialists, adapted for the ice worlds of their home system. Their equipment operates best in sub-zero temperatures, which is why they chose Pluto. But that also means their power distribution systems are vulnerable to thermal shock." Lieutenant Zhang leaned forward. "You're talking about superheating their power grid?" "Exactly. Zhang, you'll plant shaped charges on their primary power conduits while Reginald hacks their thermal regulation systems. When we overload their grid, we'll have maybe 30 minutes before their backup systems come online. That's our window to reach the command center and eliminate their leadership." "What about extraction?" asked Thompson, a sniper whose steady hands had accounted for over 300 enemy kills. Janice met each of their eyes in turn. "There may not be one. Admiral Chen was clear about mission priorities. But I'll tell you what I told him, we've all sworn an oath to protect humanity. Today we honor that oath." The team absorbed this information with the stoic professionalism of career soldiers. They had all volunteered for special operations knowing that some missions came with no guarantee of return. "Final equipment check in 30 minutes, Janice announced. "We deploy at 1800. Questions?" Kowalski raised his hand. "Ma'am, what's our rules of engagement regarding Orc civilians?" It was a good question, and one that spoke well of the young soldier's character. "Intelligence suggests this is a purely military installation, but if we encounter non-combatants, we follow standard protocols. Minimize casualties where possible, but remember, they're here to conquer our home. We can't afford to be merciful if it compromises the mission." As the team dispersed to make final preparations, Janice remained in the briefing room, staring at the tactical display. Somewhere on that frozen, distant world, 15,000 enemy soldiers were preparing for humanity's extinction. In 6 hours, she and her team would be all that stood between Earth and annihilation. She thought again of Sarah, probably sitting in some classroom on Mars right now, studying literature or xenobiology or whatever subject currently held her interest. Would she even know what had happened here? Would anyone remember the names of the soldiers who died to give humanity a fighting chance? It didn't matter. This was the job. This was the oath. The Shadow's Edge detached from the Meridian with barely a whisper, its advanced propulsion systems designed for stealth rather than speed. As they cleared the larger vessel's sensor shadow, Janice watched their home ship dwindle to a distant point of light against the starfield. Behind them, hidden in the asteroid belt, the main fleet waited for their signal. "Cloaking systems active," reported Pilot Officer Stevens from the bridge. "We're running silent and invisible, Captain. Estimated time to Pluto intercept is 14 hours. 14 hours to cross the gulf between survival and extinction." Janice made her way through the frigate's corridors, checking on her team. Most were trying to sleep, knowing they would need every ounce of strength for the mission ahead. Others maintained their equipment with the obsessive care of professional soldiers. She found Lieutenant Zhang in the weapons bay, carefully inspecting each explosive charge with practiced hands. "How are we looking, Lieutenant?" "All charges nominal, ma'am. I've got enough thermal plasma here to crack a small moon, but the tricky part will be placing them precisely. Orc construction techniques are different from ours." That was an understatement. Humanity's first encounters with Orc technology had been revelatory and terrifying in equal measure. Their engineering was based on principles that human science was only beginning to understand: materials that grew stronger under stress, power systems that seemed to violate conservation of energy, weapons that fired projectiles of pure hatred given physical form. "What's your assessment of their defensive capabilities?" Janice asked. John pulled up a technical readout on his datapad. "Based on the reconnaissance data, they're using a layered defense system. Outer perimeter sensors, patrol routes, automated weapons platforms, and finally the command center's own shields. But here's the interesting part: their power grid is surprisingly centralized. Take out 3 key junction points, and the whole northern section goes dark." "Including the command center?" "Including the command center. For about 30 minutes, like you said. After that, their backup systems will restore partial power, but those 30 minutes should be enough if we move fast." Janice nodded. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, which made it both more likely to succeed and more vulnerable to unexpected complications. But then, every good military plan was a balance between ambition and pragmatism. She continued her rounds, finding Corporal Reginald hunched over a bank of electronic equipment that looked like it belonged in a laboratory rather than a military vessel. "How's our electronic warfare package, Corporal?" "Beautiful, ma'am. The Orcs use quantum encryption for their communications, but we've managed to crack their protocols thanks to the data recovered from the Ceres incident. I should be able to not only jam their systems, but actually feed them false information during the critical phase of the mission." "False information?" "Sensor ghosts, fake patrol reports, that sort of thing. Make them think their perimeter is secure while we're actually inside their compound. The confusion should buy us precious extra time." Time. Everything came down to time. They would have perhaps an hour from initial breach to mission completion before Orc reinforcements made escape impossible. Every second would count. As they passed the orbit of Neptune, the Shadow's Edge performed a course correction that would bring them to Pluto along an approach vector calculated to minimize detection. The dwarf planet appeared on their sensors as a pale, distant dot, growing steadily larger as they approached. "Captain," Stevens called from the bridge. "We're picking up increased communication traffic from the target. Looks like they're expecting some kind of supply convoy." Janice joined him at the pilot station, studying the sensor displays. The communication patterns were definitely unusual, more activity than their intelligence reports had suggested. "Could be an opportunity," she mused. "Or a complication. Either way, we proceed as planned." As they entered Pluto's gravity well, the true scope of the Orc installation became apparent. The fortress sprawled across the Sputnik Planitia like a mechanized city, its angular towers reaching toward the star-spotted sky. Defensive platforms orbited the complex in precisely calculated patterns, their weapon arrays tracking potential threats with mechanical precision. "My God!" whispered Martinez, who had joined them on the bridge. How many of them are down there? Too many, Janice replied. But that's why we're here. The Shadow's edge settled into a low orbit, its cloaking system straining to hide them from the increasingly sophisticated sensor sweeps emanating from the surface. They had perhaps 6 hours before their stealth technology would be overcome by sheer computational brute force. Final equipment check, Janice announced over the ship's communication system. We deploy in 2 hours. The drop pods fell through Pluto's thin atmosphere like metallic rain, their heat signatures masked by a carefully timed meteorite shower that Corporal Reginald had convinced the Orc sensors was a natural phenomenon. Janice felt the familiar knot of pre-combat tension in her stomach as her pod's retrothrusters fired, slowing their descent to survivable levels. The surface of Pluto rushed up to meet them, a desolate landscape of nitrogen ice and frozen methane, broken by the artificial mountains of the Orc fortress. Her pod touched down in a cloud of crystalline dust, its shock absorbers hissing as they absorbed the impact energy. Sound off, she whispered into her helmet comm as she triggered the pod's emergency release. Around her, 11 other pods had landed in a rough circle, their occupants emerging like ghosts into the alien twilight. Martinez here, green status. Zhang, all charges secure. Reginald, electronics nominal. One by one, her team reported successful deployment. The gravity here was significantly less than Earth normal, which would take some adjustment, but their powered armor compensated automatically for the different conditions. Janice activated her suit's tactical display, overlaying a map of the surrounding terrain with their planned infiltration route. The command center loomed 3 kilometers to the northeast, its pyramid shape clearly visible against the horizon despite the distance. Movement discipline from here on, she whispered into the comm. We have 4 hours until the next satellite pass. Let's make them count. They moved across the frozen landscape in a tactical formation honed by years of joint training. The environmental suits were marvels of engineering, powered armor that provided life support, enhanced strength, and adaptive camouflage that made them nearly invisible against Pluto's mottled surface. The first Orc patrol appeared 30 minutes into their approach, a squad of 8 heavily armed soldiers following a predetermined route along the fortress perimeter. Janice held up a closed fist, and her team froze in place, their suits automatically adjusting their camouflage patterns to match the surrounding terrain. The Orcs were impressive specimens, each standing over 2 meters tall, their bodies covered in natural armor plating that had evolved over millions of years on frozen death worlds. They carried weapons that seemed to be grown rather than manufactured, organic-looking rifles that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Their leader, distinguished by elaborate scarification across his visible skin, carried what appeared to be a ceremonial axe alongside his energy weapon. They passed within 10 meters of Thompson's position without detecting the human infiltrators. As soon as they were out of sight, the team resumed movement toward their first objective. The outer perimeter fence was exactly as intelligence had described, a barrier of energy that would disintegrate any unauthorized organic material that attempted to cross it. But Lieutenant Zhang had come prepared for this eventuality. Molecular destabilizer, he whispered, producing a device that looked like an oversized tuning fork. Should create a gap just wide enough for us to slip through without triggering their alarms. The device hummed with barely contained energy as Zhang applied it to the barrier. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a section of the energy fence flickered and died, leaving a human-sized gap that would remain open for exactly 90 seconds. They slipped through one by one, their movements precise and economical. On the other side, the Orc fortress revealed its true scale, massive structures that dwarfed anything humanity had built, connected by covered walkways and underground tunnels that spoke to sophisticated military engineering. First checkpoint, Janice whispered into her comm. Reginald, you're up. The corporal approached the nearest communication relay, a tower-like structure bristling with alien technology. His electronic warfare equipment interfaced with the Orc systems through a quantum resonance field, slowly insinuating itself into their communication network. I'm in, he reported after several tense minutes. Feeding them false patrol reports now. According to their sensors, everything is completely normal. They moved deeper into the complex, using a combination of stealth technology and careful timing to avoid the regular patrols. The Orcs maintained excellent security discipline, but they weren't expecting infiltrators capable of advanced cloaking technology. The first power junction was located in a service tunnel beneath the main complex. Zhang descended through a maintenance access point, his equipment bag carefully secured to prevent any metallic sounds that might alert nearby guards. "Visual on target," he whispered. "Beginning placement of thermal charges." The Orc power systems were unlike anything in human experience, crystalline matrices that conducted energy through what appeared to be living tissue. Yang's charges had been specifically designed to exploit the thermal differential between the crystal components and their organic housings. "First charge placed," he reported. "Moving to Junction 2. As they infiltrated deeper into the complex, Janice began to appreciate the true sophistication of Orc military architecture. This wasn't just a fortress. It was a complete ecosystem designed to support a substantial population indefinitely. Atmospheric processors maintained breathable air, geothermal taps provided unlimited power, and manufacturing facilities could apparently produce everything from weapons to food. The second power junction was more heavily guarded, requiring Thompson to eliminate a sentry with a precisely placed shot from his silenced rifle. The Orc soldier dropped without a sound, his body armor absorbing the projectile's energy and preventing any telltale energy discharge. "Target neutralized," Thompson reported clinically. "No alarm response." Jean quickly planted his second charge while Martinez and Kowalski maintained overwatch. The thermal devices were configured to detonate simultaneously, creating a cascade failure that would overload the entire power grid for the northern section of the complex. The third junction proved to be the most challenging. It was located inside the main fortress structure, requiring them to penetrate the Orcs' primary defensive perimeter. Security here was tight: automated weapon systems, roving patrols, and sensor arrays that swept continuously for any sign of intrusion. "Multiple hostiles, bearing 270. Martinez whispered, his enhanced optics tracking a patrol of 12 Orc soldiers moving along a predetermined route. They waited in the shadows of a communication tower, their suits cycling through camouflage patterns to remain invisible. The patrol passed close enough that Janice could hear the alien's guttural conversation through her helmet's external audio pickups. When the patrol was finally out of sight, they moved quickly toward the final objective. The third power junction was housed in a heavily armored chamber that required specialized cutting tools to access. "Almost there," John whispered as his plasma cutter slowly burned through the junction's protective housing. 13 more seconds. That's when the alarms began to sound. The wailing of Orc alarms echoed across the frozen landscape like the death cries of some mechanical beast. Emergency lights bathed the fortress complex in hellish red illumination as blast doors slammed shut and defensive turrets swiveled to scan for targets. "They've found the sentry," Janice said grimly into her calm. "John, how much longer?" 15 seconds on the final charge," came the strained reply. "But ma'am, they're sealing the complex. If we don't move now, we're trapped." Through her helmet's enhanced optics, Janice watched as Orc soldiers poured from barracks buildings and defensive positions. Their movements were coordinated and professional. These weren't mindless brutes but disciplined military personnel responding to a security breach with textbook efficiency. "Charges placed," Zhang announced triumphantly. "Detonation in 60 seconds. All teams, execute Breakout Alpha," Janice ordered. "We have 1 minute to reach minimum safe distance before the lights go out." They moved through the fortress complex like a pack of hunting wolves, their powered armor providing enhanced speed and agility despite Pluto's lower gravity. Behind them, Orc soldiers were organizing search patterns and establishing perimeter checkpoints. "Contact left!" Martinez called out as a patrol rounded a corner directly ahead of them. His assault rifle chattered briefly, the caseless ammunition tearing through Orc body armor with devastating effect. 2 aliens dropped immediately, but the third managed to activate what appeared to be a personal communication device before Thompson's sniper rifle removed his head. "They know we're here," Janice said unnecessarily. The fortress was now alive with activity as hundreds of Orc soldiers mobilized to hunt down the infiltrators. The power charges detonated with a sound like thunder, sending shockwaves through the complex's superstructure. Emergency lighting flickered and died as the northern section's power grid collapsed in a cascade of failing systems. In the sudden darkness, their night vision equipment gave them a crucial advantage over the temporarily blinded Orc defenders. "Command center is 2 clicks northeast," Janice announced. "We have 30 minutes before backup power comes online. Move!" They sprinted through the darkened corridors, their footsteps echoing in the alien architecture. Emergency lighting began to flicker on as battery-powered backup systems engaged, but the main defensive systems remained offline. The command center loomed ahead of them, a massive pyramidal structure that seemed to absorb what little light reached it. As they approached, it became clear that the building was more than just architecture. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with organic rhythms, as if the entire structure were somehow alive. "Biological components," Zhang observed, scanning the building with his technical equipment. "The entire structure appears to be part organism, part technology. I've never seen anything like it. Can we breach it?" Janice asked. "Oh yes, ma'am. But when this thing dies, it's going to die loud." They approached the command center's main entrance, a massive doorway sealed by what appeared to be a membrane rather than traditional armor plating. Zhang attached shaped charges to key structural points while Reginald worked on bypassing the electronic security systems. "They're using bioelectric locks," the corporal reported. "I can fool them, but it'll take a few minutes." Those were minutes they didn't have. Behind them, Janice could hear the sounds of organized pursuit, Orc soldiers following their trail with methodical precision. Emergency power was beginning to restore some of the complex's defensive systems, and she could see weapon emplacements swiveling to life in the distance. "Incoming!" Kowalski shouted as a squad of Orc soldiers appeared around the corner of a nearby building. Energy weapons flashed in the artificial twilight, their projectiles carving glowing furrows in the frozen ground. The firefight was brief but intense. Human technology proved superior in the dark conditions, their night vision and thermal imaging giving them critical advantages. But the Orcs were tough opponents, their natural armor absorbing tremendous punishment before finally succumbing to concentrated fire. "Breach successful," Reginald announced as the command center's entrance dilated like a giant eye. "But ma'am, their security systems are adapting. They'll have this locked down again in minutes." They plunged into the structure's interior, finding themselves in a corridor that seemed more like the inside of some vast organism than a military facility. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and the air carried a thick, organic scent that their environmental filters struggled to process. "Multiple life signs ahead," Martinez reported, consulting his tactical scanner. "At least 50 contacts, possibly more. They know we're coming." The command center's defenders were waiting for them, not just Orc soldiers, but what appeared to be the installation's senior leadership. The central chamber was a vast amphitheater filled with organic control stations, each operated by an Orc officer whose scarification indicated high rank. At the chamber's center stood a figure that dwarfed even the other Orcs, a creature that stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body covered in elaborate tribal markings and ceremonial armor. This was clearly the installation's commander, and his presence radiated an aura of barely contained violence. "Humans," the creature spoke in accented but understandable English. "You have come far to die on this frozen world. We came here to stop you," Janice replied, her rifle trained on the alien commander. "Your invasion ends here." The Orc leader's laugh was like grinding stone. "Invasion? Foolish creature, you understand nothing. We are not here to invade your pathetic world, we are here to save it." Before Janice could respond, the chamber erupted in violence as the Orc defenders opened fire. The wailing of Orc alarms echoed across the frozen landscape like the death cries of some mechanical beast. Emergency lights bathed the fortress complex in hellish red illumination as blast doors slammed shut and defensive turrets swiveled to scan for targets. "They've found the sentry," Janice said grimly into her calm. "John, how much longer?" 15 seconds on the final charge," came the strained reply. But ma'am, they're sealing the complex. If we don't move now, we're trapped. Through her helmet's enhanced optics, Janice watched as Orc soldiers poured from barracks buildings and defensive positions. Their movements were coordinated and professional. These weren't mindless brutes but disciplined military personnel responding to a security breach with textbook efficiency. Charges placed, Zhang announced triumphantly. Detonation in 60 seconds. All teams, execute Breakout Alpha, Janice ordered. We have 1 minute to reach minimum safe distance before the lights go out. They moved through the fortress complex like a pack of hunting wolves, their powered armor providing enhanced speed and agility despite Pluto's lower gravity. Behind them, Orc soldiers were organizing search patterns and establishing perimeter checkpoints. Contact left! Martinez called out as a patrol rounded a corner directly ahead of them. His assault rifle chattered briefly, the caseless ammunition tearing through Orc body armor with devastating effect. 2 aliens dropped immediately, but the third managed to activate what appeared to be a personal communication device before Thompson's sniper rifle removed his head. They know we're here, Janice said unnecessarily. The fortress was now alive with activity as hundreds of Orc soldiers mobilized to hunt down the infiltrators. The power charges detonated with a sound like thunder, sending shockwaves through the complex's superstructure. Emergency lighting flickered and died as the northern section's power grid collapsed in a cascade of failing systems. In the sudden darkness, their night vision equipment gave them a crucial advantage over the temporarily blinded Orc defenders. Command center is 2 clicks northeast, Janice announced. We have 30 minutes before backup power comes online. Move! They sprinted through the darkened corridors, their footsteps echoing in the alien architecture. Emergency lighting began to flicker on as battery-powered backup systems engaged, but the main defensive systems remained offline. The command center loomed ahead of them, a massive pyramidal structure that seemed to absorb what little light reached it. As they approached, it became clear that the building was more than just architecture. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with organic rhythms, as if the entire structure were somehow alive. Biological components, Zhang observed, scanning the building with his technical equipment. The entire structure appears to be part organism, part technology. I've never seen anything like it. Can we breach it? Janice asked. Oh yes, ma'am. But when this thing dies, it's going to die loud. They approached the command center's main entrance, a massive doorway sealed by what appeared to be a membrane rather than traditional armor plating. Zhang attached shaped charges to key structural points while Reginald worked on bypassing the electronic security systems. They're using bioelectric locks, the corporal reported. I can fool them, but it'll take a few minutes. Those were minutes they didn't have. Behind them, Janice could hear the sounds of organized pursuit, Orc soldiers following their trail with methodical precision. Emergency power was beginning to restore some of the complex's defensive systems, and she could see weapon emplacements swiveling to life in the distance. Incoming! Kowalski shouted as a squad of Orc soldiers appeared around the corner of a nearby building. Energy weapons flashed in the artificial twilight, their projectiles carving glowing furrows in the frozen ground. The firefight was brief but intense. Human technology proved superior in the dark conditions, their night vision and thermal imaging giving them critical advantages. But the Orcs were tough opponents, their natural armor absorbing tremendous punishment before finally succumbing to concentrated fire. Breach successful, Reginald announced as the command center's entrance dilated like a giant eye. But ma'am, their security systems are adapting. They'll have this locked down again in minutes. They plunged into the structure's interior, finding themselves in a corridor that seemed more like the inside of some vast organism than a military facility. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and the air carried a thick, organic scent that their environmental filters struggled to process. Multiple life signs ahead, Martinez reported, consulting his tactical scanner. At least 50 contacts, possibly more. They know we're coming. The command center's defenders were waiting for them, not just Orc soldiers, but what appeared to be the installation's senior leadership. The central chamber was a vast amphitheater filled with organic control stations, each operated by an Orc officer whose scarification indicated high rank. At the chamber's center stood a figure that dwarfed even the other Orcs, a creature that stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body covered in elaborate tribal markings and ceremonial armor. This was clearly the installation's commander, and his presence radiated an aura of barely contained violence. "Humans," the creature spoke in accented but understandable English. "You have come far to die on this frozen world. We came here to stop you," Janice replied, her rifle trained on the alien commander. "Your invasion ends here." The Orc leader's laugh was like grinding stone. "Invasion? Foolish creature, you understand nothing. We are not here to invade your pathetic world, we are here to save it." Before Janice could respond, the chamber erupted in violence as the Orc defenders opened fire. Plasma bolts seared through the command chamber's organic architecture as human and Orc forces engaged in desperate close-quarters combat. The bioluminescent walls flickered and bled strange fluids where stray shots punctured their surfaces, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burning alien tissue. Janice dove behind one of the organic control stations, its surface providing surprisingly effective cover against Orc energy weapons. Around her, her team deployed with the practiced efficiency of veterans, each soldier finding firing positions and establishing interlocking fields of fire. "Zhang, get those charges placed!" she shouted over the din of combat. "We need to bring this whole structure down." The demolitions expert sprinted across the chamber, his powered armor deflecting several plasma bolts as he reached the central control cluster. The organic machinery here was more sophisticated than anything they had encountered, living computers that processed information through biological neural networks. "Contact right!" Thompson called out, his sniper rifle dropping an Orc officer who had been coordinating the defense from an elevated position. The alien's death caused several nearby control stations to convulse and die, their neural connections severed. The battle was turning into a grinding slugfest as more Orc reinforcements poured into the chamber. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were elite guards equipped with advanced weaponry and armor that could deflect all but the most precisely aimed shots. "Ma'am, I need covering fire!" Zhang shouted as he worked to plant his charges on the central processing nodes. "These biological components are fighting the detonation sequence." Martinez and Kowalski laid down suppressing fire while Zhang struggled with equipment that seemed to have a mind of its own. The organic control systems were actually trying to expel his explosives, pseudopods of living tissue wrapping around the devices and attempting to eject them. 30 seconds, he finally announced. "But the biological components are interfering with the timer systems." The Orc commander chose that moment to enter the battle personally, his ceremonial axe glowing with some form of energy field as he charged across the chamber toward Janice's position. The weapon carved through her cover as if it were made of paper, forcing her to roll away as tons of organic debris crashed down where she had been crouching. She came up firing, her assault rifle's caseless rounds sparking off the commander's advanced armor. The creature was incredibly fast for something so large, closing the distance between them with surprising agility. "For the glory of Earth!" she shouted, drawing her sidearm as her primary weapon's magazine ran dry. The Orc's axe whistled through the air where her head had been a split second before. In the close confines of the chamber, his size and reach gave him a significant advantage, but Janice's powered armor provided enhanced speed and reflexes that helped even the odds. She managed to put 3 rounds into the commander's torso before his backhanded blow sent her flying across the chamber. Her armor's shock absorbers prevented serious injury, but she could feel the system struggling to compensate for the tremendous force of the impact. "Charges armed," Zhang announced triumphantly. 60 seconds to detonation." The news galvanized both sides. The remaining Orc defenders redoubled their efforts to eliminate the human infiltrators, while Janice's team fought desperately to hold their positions long enough for the explosives to complete their work. But something was wrong. As the countdown progressed, Janice began to notice disturbing details about the command center's construction. The organic components weren't just alien technology, they were familiar in a way that made her stomach turn. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, studying one of the neural processing nodes more closely. Jean, these aren't Orc biologics. These are human. The implications hit her like a physical blow. The command center was partially constructed from human tissue, neural networks harvested from the civilians killed at Ceres and other destroyed colonies. The Orcs hadn't just murdered 17,000 people, they had turned them into components in their war machine. The discovery filled her with a cold rage that burned hotter than plasma fire. This wasn't just about stopping an invasion anymore. It was about destroying an abomination that perverted everything humanity held sacred. All teams execute Protocol 7, she ordered, her voice deadly calm. No prisoners. No mercy. Protocol 7 was the designation for total elimination, a standing order reserved for situations where the enemy had committed such atrocities that conventional rules of engagement no longer applied. Her team responded with grim efficiency. Kowalski's grenade launcher sent fragmentation rounds into clusters of Orc defenders, while Thompson's precision rifle eliminated officers with methodical accuracy. Martinez moved through the chamber like a force of nature, his close-quarters training allowing him to engage multiple targets simultaneously. The Orc commander, wounded but still dangerous, made one final attempt to reach the human explosives. He understood as well as anyone that the destruction of this command center would cripple Orc operations throughout the system. Janice intercepted him halfway across the chamber, her sidearm empty but her tactical knife ready. The powered armor gave her enhanced strength, but the Orc's natural physiology was still formidable. They grappled in the shadow of the organic control cluster, each trying to gain a decisive advantage. Your people will burn, the commander snarled, his axe seeking her throat. Our fleet comes, and your worlds will become feeding grounds for our children. Not today, Janice replied, driving her knife between the plates of his armor. And not ever. The blade found something vital, and the Orc commander staggered backward, dark fluid spreading across his torso. But even mortally wounded, he had enough strength left for one final attack. His axe caught her across the chest, the energy field cutting through her armor's outer layer and sending feedback surges through her suit's systems. Janice felt ribs crack as she was thrown backward, her vision blurring as her helmet's display flickered and died. 10 seconds to detonation! Jean shouted from somewhere that seemed very far away. Through failing systems and increasing pain, Janice could see her team preparing for the explosion. They had done their job. The command center would be destroyed, the Orc invasion would be disrupted, and Earth would have time to prepare its defenses. The charges detonated with a sound like the world ending. The explosion that consumed the Orc command center was visible from orbit, a pillar of fire that rose through Pluto's thin atmosphere like an accusatory finger pointed at the stars. The biological components of the structure burned with an unnatural light, their alien chemistry creating colors that had no names in human language. Janice regained consciousness in the ruins, her damaged armor struggling to maintain life support in the toxic atmosphere created by the burning organic matter. Around her, the command chamber had been reduced to a crater filled with twisted metal and smoking biological debris. Sound off, she croaked into her comm system, hoping that some of her team had survived the blast. Martinez here, came a weak but determined voice. Suit damaged but functional. I've got eyes on Zhang and Thompson, they're alive but hurt. One by one, her surviving team members reported in. Miraculously, most had survived the explosion, though several were dealing with significant equipment damage and injuries. The Orc defenders had been less fortunate. The biological components of their command center had released toxic compounds when destroyed, and their environmental protection had been insufficient. Reginald, what's our communication status? Janice asked as she struggled to her feet, her armor's servos whining in protest. Long-range comms are down, but I'm picking up local traffic, the corporal replied. The Orcs are in complete disarray. Multiple units reporting loss of central command, requesting new orders that aren't coming. The mission had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. Not only had they destroyed the command center, but the organic nature of Orc command and control systems meant that the loss of central processing had created a cascade failure throughout their entire military structure. But their success came with a price. The explosion had alerted every Orc soldier on Pluto to their location, and emergency power was beginning to restore some of the fortress's defensive systems. "We need to reach the extraction point," Janice announced, checking her tactical display. "The Shadow's Edge will be waiting for us at the secondary landing zone in 4 hours." It was an optimistic estimate. The secondary landing zone was 15 kilometers away across hostile terrain, and they would have to evade thousands of angry Orc soldiers while dealing with damaged equipment and injuries. They moved through the burning ruins of the command center, their environmental suits protecting them from the worst of the toxic atmosphere. Behind them, the organic structure continued to burn with that unnatural light, casting dancing shadows across the frozen landscape. The first Orc patrol found them 20 minutes into their withdrawal. A squad of 8 soldiers, their equipment singed by the command center's destruction but their fighting spirit intact. The engagement was brief but vicious, human technological superiority against Orc physical toughness and numerical advantage. When it was over, 3 Orcs lay dead and Thompson was nursing a plasma burn on his left shoulder. His armor had absorbed most of the energy, but the wound would slow them down. "How many more patrols between us and extraction?" Martinez asked, consulting his tactical scanner. "Too many," Janice replied honestly. "But we don't have to fight them all. Stealth and evasion from here on. We save our ammunition for when we really need it." They crossed the frozen wasteland like ghosts, their damaged suits still providing enough camouflage to avoid most Orc patrols. The aliens were conducting systematic searches of the area around the destroyed command center, but their search patterns were predictable and could be avoided with careful timing. 2 hours into their withdrawal, they encountered something unexpected, a group of human prisoners being evacuated from a facility near the fortress perimeter. 17 men and women in civilian clothing, their faces bearing the haunted expression of people who had seen too much horror. "Survivors from the research station at Make," one of them explained in a whisper when Janice's team approached under cover of darkness. "They'd been using us for experiments." The implications were chilling. If the Orcs were conducting biological experiments on human prisoners, it explained how they had developed the organic components of their command systems. These people had witnessed atrocities that would give them nightmares for the rest of their lives. "Can you travel?" Janice asked the apparent leader of the group, a middle-aged woman whose clothing identified her as a xenobiologist. "We'll manage," the woman replied with quiet determination. "Dr. Sarah Chin, Make Research Collective. Whatever you people did to their command center, it saved our lives. They were preparing to execute us when the explosion started." Chun. The name was familiar, and after a moment Janice realized why. This was Admiral Chen's sister, reported missing when the Make station had gone silent 6 months ago. The Admiral would be overjoyed to learn she was still alive. But now they had 17 additional people to evacuate, most of them in poor physical condition and none equipped for the harsh environment of Pluto's surface. Their original extraction plan would have to be completely revised. "Change of plans?" Janice announced to her team. "We're taking these people with us." It was the right decision morally, but tactically it was a nightmare. Moving 29 people across 15 kilometers of hostile terrain while avoiding thousands of enemy soldiers would require perfect timing and a considerable amount of luck. They jury-rigged environmental protection for the civilians using spare equipment and emergency supplies, creating a motley collection of gear that would keep them alive but provided no protection against weapons fire. The group would be completely dependent on Janice's soldiers for protection. "Stay close, move quiet, and do exactly what we tell you," Martinez instructed the civilians. "We've got one chance to get you home." As they resumed their withdrawal, the burning command center continued to cast its eerie light across the landscape behind them. The sight was both beautiful and terrible, the funeral pyre of humanity's enemies, but also a beacon that drew every Orc soldier on the planet toward their location. 3 hours to extraction. 15 kilometers of frozen hell between them and safety. And somewhere in the darkness, an army of aliens hunting for the soldiers who had just struck the most devastating blow in the war for humanity's survival. The extraction point was a windswept plateau on the edge of Pluto's Sputnik Planitia, chosen for its clear sight lines and defensible positions. As Janice's expanded group approached the landing zone, she could see the Shadow's Edge waiting in the distance, its hull barely visible against the star-speckled sky. But between them and Salvation lay the largest concentration of Orc forces they had yet encountered. "My God!" whispered Dr. Chin, studying the enemy positions through borrowed tactical binoculars. "There must be 300 of them." The Orcs had correctly identified the most likely extraction points and concentrated their forces accordingly. The landing zone was surrounded by defensive positions, weapon emplacements, and roving patrols that would make a direct approach suicidal. "They're smart," Martinez observed grimly. "Whoever's running their tactical response learned fast after losing their command center." Janice surveyed the situation with the calculating gaze of a professional soldier. The numbers were impossible. Even with their technological advantages, 13 combat-effective troops couldn't fight through 300 enemy soldiers while protecting 17 civilians. But sometimes the impossible was the only option available. "Jean, how much ordnance do we have left?" she asked. The demolitions expert consulted his equipment manifest. "For thermal charges, 6 fragmentation grenades, and whatever ammunition we're carrying. Maybe enough to make a dent, but not enough to clear the landing zone." "What about the ship's weapons?" Thompson suggested. Janice shook her head. "The Shadow's Edge is built for stealth, not ground support. Her weapons are designed for ship-to-ship combat, not close air support." She studied the tactical situation, looking for any advantage they could exploit. The Orc positions were well placed and professionally maintained, but they had been established quickly in response to the command center's destruction. That suggested potential weaknesses in their coordination and communication. "Reginald, are you still tapped into their communication network?" "Partially," the corporal replied. "The command center's destruction disrupted their primary channels, but they're using backup systems now. I might be able to cause some confusion, but nothing like what we had before." An idea began to form in Janice's mind, desperate and probably suicidal, but potentially their only chance. It would require perfect timing, incredible luck, and the kind of sacrifice that heroes were remembered for. "Here's what we're going to do," she announced. "Reginald will create a diversion on the eastern perimeter, fake calm traffic suggesting a major assault from that direction. While the Orcs are repositioning to meet this phantom threat, Jean will use our remaining charges to create a gap in their western defenses." "And then?" Martinez asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Then we make our run. All of us, together, straight through their lines to the landing zone. Fast and hard, before they can recover from the confusion." It was a plan born of desperation, but it had the virtue of simplicity. Complex operations had a tendency to fall apart under pressure, while simple plans could sometimes succeed through sheer audacity. They spent 30 minutes preparing for what would likely be their final battle. Ammunition was redistributed to ensure maximum effectiveness, the civilians were briefed on emergency procedures, and final equipment checks were completed with meticulous care. Dr. Chin approached Janice as they prepared to move out. "Captain, I want you to know, what you people are doing for us, the sacrifice you're making, we won't forget." "Ma'am, with respect, let's worry about surviving first," Janice replied. "You can thank us properly when we're all safely back on Earth." The diversion began at exactly 2300 hours local time. Reginald's electronic warfare suite flooded the Orc communication networks with false reports of human reinforcements approaching from multiple directions. To add credibility to the deception, John detonated 2 of his remaining charges on the eastern perimeter, creating impressive explosions that suggested a major assault. The response was immediate and predictable. Orc forces began repositioning to meet the perceived threat, pulling soldiers away from the western approaches to reinforce their eastern defenses. It wouldn't take them long to realize they'd been deceived, but those precious minutes might be enough. "Western perimeter is thinning out," Martinez reported, watching the enemy positions through his rifle scope. "Looks like maybe 50 soldiers left between us and the landing zone. That's our window." Janice announced. Jean, blow us a hole. Everyone else, prepare to move fast. The two remaining thermal charges detonated simultaneously, creating a gap in the Orc defensive line wide enough for their group to exploit. The explosions also served as a signal to the Shadow's Edge. The ship's engines began warming up, preparing for immediate departure. Go! 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 Janice shouted as they broke cover and sprinted toward the landing zone. The civilians struggled to keep up despite their desperate motivation, but the powered armor of Janice's soldiers allowed them to provide assistance when needed. They moved across the frozen ground in a tactical formation designed to protect the non-combatants while maintaining maximum firepower forward. The Orcs responded quickly to the new threat, but their repositioning had left them out of position for an effective counterattack. Scattered defensive positions opened fire, but their shots were uncoordinated and largely ineffective. "Contact front!" Thompson called out as an Orc heavy weapons team emerged from a concealed position directly ahead of them. His sniper rifle spoke once, and the enemy gunner toppled backward, his weapons spinning uselessly into the darkness. They were halfway to the landing zone when the Orcs finally organized an effective response. A concentrated volley of plasma fire forced them to seek cover behind a low ridge, pinning them down just 300 meters from safety. "They've got us bracketed," Martinez reported grimly. "At least 2 heavy weapons positions, plus infantry support. We're not getting through that without taking casualties." Janice looked at the Shadow's Edge waiting in the distance, so close she could see the frost forming on its hull. Behind them, she could hear the sounds of Orc reinforcements approaching as the enemy realized they had been deceived. "Cover me," she announced, checking her remaining ammunition. "I'm going to clear those positions." "Ma'am, that's suicide," Martinez protested. "Maybe," Janice replied. "But sitting here is definitely suicide. Get those civilians to the ship, that's an order." Before anyone could stop her, she was moving, using every piece of cover the terrain provided to approach the Orc positions. Her powered armor's enhancement systems pushed her beyond normal human limits, allowing her to cross ground that should have been impassable under fire. The first heavy weapons position died in a hail of grenades and concentrated rifle fire. The second took longer, requiring her to engage in close combat with its crew. Her armor absorbed tremendous punishment, but held together long enough for her to eliminate the threat. Behind her, she could see Martinez leading the civilians and remaining soldiers toward the extraction point. The Shadow's Edge had opened its boarding ramp, ready to depart the moment everyone was aboard. But the Orcs weren't finished. A final wave of enemy soldiers crested the ridge behind the landing zone, positioning themselves between Janice's team and their escape route. Without immediate intervention, the civilians would be caught in a crossfire that none of them would survive. Janice made her choice. She turned away from the ship and sprinted toward the advancing Orcs, her remaining ammunition and explosives ready for one final engagement. Her comm system crackled with voices, Martinez ordering her to retreat, the ship's pilot reporting enemy reinforcements, Dr. Chim pleading for her to fall back. She ignored them all. This was what soldiers did. They stood between the darkness and everyone they had sworn to protect, no matter the cost. The final battle was brief but decisive. Janice's superior equipment and training allowed her to eliminate dozens of enemy soldiers, but the sheer numbers were overwhelming. Her armor's power systems failed under the concentrated fire, her weapons ran dry, and finally her injuries became too severe to continue fighting. But it was enough. The civilians and her remaining soldiers reached the Shadow's Edge safely, the ship departing Pluto with its precious cargo intact. As the vessel disappeared into the star field, Janice smiled despite her pain. The mission was complete. Earth would survive.